Welcome to the Veil of Truth, your passport to the stories that matter, globe showing Europe, Africa. I'm thrilled you're here. Let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from around the world. Chapter 1, Arrival at Marchmont Estate. Hercule Poirot's motorcar rolled to a gentle stop beneath the sweeping portico of Marchmont Estate. The early summer sky, bruised with leaden clouds, pressed low upon the autumn-tinted oaks that lined the long drive. Beyond them rose the elegant façade of the main house, honey-colored stone walls warmed by decades of sun, and tall windows glowing faintly from within. Poirot, ever immaculate in his tailored grey morning coat and starched white shirt, stepped down with the poise of a man accustomed to making entrance. His polished black shoes clicked upon the gravel, each touch deliberate as he surveyed the scene with eyes the colour of polished steel. He had been summoned by Lady Winifred Marchmont, an acquaintance from his London days, a woman of refined bearing and steadfast loyalty. Her telegram had been brief yet urgent: "Monsieur Poirot, your assistance required at once. Matters most grave. W. Marchmont." The phrase, "most grave," had set his little grey cells into motion long before he reached the county border. Now, entering through the carved oak doors, he felt the familiar thrill of anticipation. The hush within the great entrance hall bespoke an unsettled household, the discreet rustle of servants' footsteps overhead, a single footman perched on a nearby settee, head bowed. "Welcome, Monsieur Poirot," intoned the butler, Mr. Reeves, in a low, measured voice. He led Poirot across the black and white marble floor to a drawing-room where Lady Marchmont awaited. She rose as he entered, a graceful figure, draped in a silk dressing-gown the pale green of fresh mint, her hair swept high in a soft chignon. Though she wore her composure well, a tremor in her left hand betrayed her anxiety. Poirot inclined his head with elegant courtesy, his hands clasped neatly before him. "Lady Marchmont, you honoured me with your summons. Pray tell me what has occurred." His voice, composed yet insistent, carried the slightest continental lilt. She motioned to a small side table upon which lay a note of introduction from Scotland Yard, and then gestured for him to follow. Together they threaded through the house, past portraits of stern ancestors whose eyes seemed to watch them with silent curiosity. The hush persisted, windows remained drawn, blinds partly lowered as though defending the household from unwelcome intrusions, natural or otherwise. They emerged into the greenhouse, a vast iron and glass structure abloom with exotic foliage. The damp, fragrant air was heavy with the scent of orchids, ferns, and tropical blossoms. Stalwart ferns dripped with dew, hooks and trellises held climbing vines whose glossy leaves caught the soft daylight. At the far end, beneath a wrought iron arch, lay the prostrate figure of Professor Alistair Green, his once handsome face as pale as the lilies that surrounded him. A slender pruning knife, its blade satin bright, protruded from his chest. The silence seemed to deepen, as though the plants themselves held their breath. Poirot approached with caution, his movements measured. He admired the symmetry of the glass panels overhead, noting how the fractured light cast geometric patterns upon the floor, patterns undisturbed by any footprints save one. He knelt, careful not to disturb the soil, and examined the single shoe print in the damp earth near the workbench. It was a gentleman's size, perhaps a size 10, and bore the faint pattern of a well-worn sole. Nearby, on the bench's polished wood, lay a smear of yellow-green pollen, its edges blurred as though wiped hastily. Poirot raised a gloved finger and closed his eyes, inhaling the faint, sweet tang of an orchid species he did not immediately recognize. "Remarkable," he murmured. "No struggle, Lady Marchmont?" She shook her head. "None. He was found like this at first light by Mr. Price, the steward." Poirot rose and glanced at the steward, who stood in the corner with arms folded. A tall man of sober bearing, his dark eyes were fixed intently upon the detective, offering nothing but a calm reserve. Poirot noted, too, the presence of Dr. Eleanor Bishop, a botanist from Kew Gardens who had worked alongside Professor Green for years. She wore a dusty tweed coat, though indoors, and her sleeves bore traces of soil. Unbidden, Poirot's mind began to collect details, acting as sieve and magnet in turn. In one swift movement, he swept the greenhouse with his gaze, the arrangement of pots on shelving units, the price list pinned to a side door, the sealed envelope addressed to Professor Green lying among botanical sketches. Every element, however trivial it might appear, held potential significance. Poirot straightened, his moustache unshaken. "Madam, this is no mere accident of nature. We shall uncover what, or who, has wronged our professor." His tone was gentle yet unyielding, laden with the promise of resolution. Lady Marchmont inhaled sharply. "Monsieur, I beg of you, to find the culprit before more harm befalls us." Poirot offered a slight bow. "Je vous en prie, Lady Marchmont. I shall employ all my faculties, and this estate shall yield its secrets." As he spoke, a shaft of pale daylight pierced the glass dome, illuminating the tip of the knife with a cold gleam. Poirot paused, the picture of composed determination. Outside, the wind rustled the estate's tall elms, as though echoing the stir of events now set irrevocably in motion. Thus did Hercule Poirot commence his investigation at Marchmont Estate, surrounded by verdant splendor and hushed tension. The stage was set, a murdered man, an array of suspects, and a tapestry of botanical intrigue. And at its heart stood the world's greatest detective, moustache waxed to perfection, little grey cells already weaving together clues as faint and delicate as the petals of an orchid. In the sanctuary of glass and green, the game was afoot. Chapter 2, The Crime Scene. The greenhouse door clicked shut behind Hercule Poirot, sealing him within a world of glass and greenery. The air was heady, humid, fragrant, and oddly solemn, each droplet of condensation clinging to the panes like tearful witnesses. At its center lay Professor Alistair Green, his body prostrate upon the flagstones, the light from above outlining the slender pruning knife embedded between his ribs. Poirot paused, hat in hand, and surveyed the scene with the cool detachment of a man whose profession demands an impartial eye. He bent to examine the body. The professor's face, usually animated by the curious fire of discovery, was drained of blood and color. His eyes, half closed, bore the faintest glint of surprise. Poirot's gloved fingertips brushed the edge of the collar, picking up no scent of struggle, only the sharp metallic tang of blood mingled with green plant oils. He noted how the knife's blade protruded at a slight angle, as though the murderer had aimed not for swiftness but for certainty. "A deliberate thrust," he murmured, "executed with calm precision." Rising, Poirot moved to the workbench, his feet firm upon the slate floor. There he observed three objects that drew his attention: a small glass vial, half empty, a leather-bound notebook splayed open to an unfinished sketch of a rare orchid, and a single muddy footprint in the moist soil below. He crouched to inspect the footprint more closely. It was indeed a gentleman's boot, size 10 or 11, Victorian style, with an understated yet expensive leather sole. The tread was worn at the heel, indicating habitual use. "This boot belongs to one who visits these plants often," he observed to the silent greenhouse. Behind him, Dr. Eleanor Bishop cleared her throat. "Monsieur Poirot, that must belong to me," she said, her voice tight. She stepped forward, smoothing the lapel of her tweed jacket. "I came early this morning to collect tissue samples. I admit I walked here before the others, though I never touched the professor's tools." Her breathing was steady, but Poirot noted the faintest quiver in her fingertips. He inclined his head gravely. "Madame, merci. Yet I must ask each person present to remain where they first arrived. We cannot allow cross-contamination of evidence." He turned to the corner where Mr. Thomas Price, the steward, stood as though carved from oak. "Mr. Price, you discovered the body?" Price inclined his head. "Yes, sir. When I arrived to water the ferns before sunrise." He stepped to Poirot's side and pointed to a watering can resting beneath a fern frond. "I found him here, monsieur." I raised the alarm immediately. Poirot examined the can's spout, a faint trace of soil near the rim, but no droplets of water on the floor. He noted this quietly. "Very well," Poirot said. "Lady Marchmont and Mr. Price, please wait by the door. Dr. Bishop, remain by the table. I wish to speak with the other members of the household at once." As the trio departed, Poirot's gaze lingered upon the bench once more. He picked up the leather notebook, turning its pages carefully. Scrawled in the professor's brisk hand was a list of names, Latin binomials, beneath which stood the name, Clarissa Marchmont, followed by a hastily underlined note, "Visit tonight. Must speak." He closed the book gently. Stepping back, Poirot held up the glass vial. Its cork stopper lay askew upon the bench. The liquid within was. Poirot then examined the soil beneath the bench. Tiny green flecks sparkled in the lamplight, pollen grains perhaps from the nepenthes or from the rare orchids Green so cherished. He knelt and brushed a few into another slide. "Very subtle," he murmured. "The murderer hoped these would distract us." He stood, surveying the glass house as a chessboard, each plant a piece poised in silent complicity. At that moment, Lady Winifred Marchmont entered, accompanied by Victor Ray, the professor's former pupil. Lady Marchmont's expression was pale, her hands clenched at her sides. Victor, tall and keen-eyed, hurried to her side. "What have you discovered, Monsieur Poirot?" Lady Winifred asked, voice trembling. "Madam," Poirot replied, "we have a primary cause of death, the knife, and at least one secondary element, poison. The footprint belongs to someone with free access here. And these," he gestured to the plants, "have been used to bury evidence and mislead." Victor frowned. "Poison? But Alistair he would never have tasted such things." He looked from Dr. Bishop to Mr. Price, then to Miss Clarissa, who hovered by the door. "So it must be one of us. But who would do such a thing?" Poirot's moustache twitched. "Patience, mon ami. We must observe, question, and deduce. If we rush, we risk missing the crucial detail. This greenhouse has seen many acts of harmless study. Today, it harbors a darker research." He beckoned Victor to inspect the notebook. "Note this list, and the invitation to visit tonight. Why would Clarissa Marchmont be summoned here?" "Clarissa," he called. The young woman stepped forward, her face ashen. "The professor, he wished to show me something." "A new hybrid," she stammered. "Indeed?" Poirot said softly. "Might I see your handwriting?" He held out a pencil. Clarissa produced a small pad and wrote a sentence, "I shall return at dusk to discuss the orchid's lineage." Poirot compared this to the entry in the professor's notebook. His eyebrow arched. "Madam, your script is neat, precise, and yet the notebook's note shows a hurried, uneven hand. Someone has forged Professor Green's invitation." Clarissa's lips trembled. "I did not forge it. I wrote it myself, just now." Poirot nodded. "Certainly. But forged forgeries can reveal much. The lack of fluency indicates the forger was not accustomed to Professor Green's script. A novice, perhaps desperate." He paused, letting the implication settle. Outside, a gust rattled the glass panes, as though emphasizing the moment. "I shall require statements from each person present this morning. And we must take samples of soil, pollen, and plant fluid for analysis. The laboratory at Scotland Yard will confirm their origins." He stepped to the door and opened it, gesturing. "Please, all of you, return to the main house. We proceed there." As they filed out, Poirot remained, alone amidst the foliage. He ran a fingertip along the knife's blade, noting its inscription, G. Hartley and Sons, Sheffield, a supplier common to many gardeners. He sighed. "Monsieur Green," he whispered. "You have been betrayed by familiarity." "But by whom? And to what end?" With that, he tucked the knife into its protective sheath, closed his little black case, and stepped into the misty morning light, his mind already weaving together the threads of a tapestry only he could fully comprehend. Chapter 3: Gathering of Suspects. The morning sun, pale and diffused by a veil of mist, cast long shadows across the marble floor hall of Marchmont estate. Poirot stood before the grand fireplace, its hearth cold now that the household had gathered. He surveyed them one by one, his posture perfectly composed, moustache waxed to a smooth curve, hands clasped behind his back. Around him stood 4 individuals whose lives had intersected fatally with Professor Green's, each bore a secret, each had motive and opportunity. "Mademoiselle, Messrs," he began, voice measured, "we must examine the mind as well as the evidence. Firstly, Lady Winifred Marchmont herself. She was a woman of dignified grace, her gentility unshakable even in crisis. Yet her eyes, pale blue and haunted, betrayed unease. She had summoned Poirot, but had she known more than she admitted? When questioned, Lady Marchmont stammered over her account of yesterday's events. She had dined late with guests and retired early to write letters. "I saw nothing unusual," she insisted. Poirot noted the tremor in her voice and the crease beside her left eye, unused to genuine fear, perhaps. Next, Dr. Eleanor Bishop, the Kew botanist. Tall, precise, her tweed coat dusted with potting soil, she presented as calm professionalism. "Professor Green and I were collaborating on the hybridization of Nepenthes raja," she declared, adjusting her pince-nez. Yet Poirot observed her restless gaze flick toward the greenhouse door. When pressed, she admitted Green had confronted her about irregular shipments of plant specimens, shipments she claimed were for legitimate research. He had warned her that smuggling protected species might ruin her reputation. She had answered with a cool smile. Now, her shoulders slumped under a burden no scheduling conflict could explain. Mr. Thomas Price, the estate steward, was a study in quiet authority. His posture stiff, he stood apart, dark eyes unwavering. "I have served Marchmont estate for over 20 years, he said, voice low and steady. "I cared for Professor Green's plants and observed no discord, until now." Yet Poirot noticed a slight hesitation when Price described the discovery of the body. Did he pause to conceal what he'd actually seen? Poirot leaned forward slightly. "You found the professor at dawn," he reminded gently. "What did you hear before you entered?" Price's gaze dropped. "Only the greenhouse door's soft creak," he answered. But Poirot sensed that omission of any footfall was telling. Miss Clarissa Marchmont, Lady Winifred's niece, appeared next. Young, elegant, with a determined air, she gave a curt nod. Her interest in botany had drawn Green's mentorship, yet she had quietly resented his patronizing tone. Clarissa's hands trembled slightly as she recounted her evening, an overdue supper with her aunt, then retiring to the library. She insisted she never entered the greenhouse after sunset. Poirot's eyes lingered on her carefully knuckled gloves. Beneath them he suspected a faint stain, perhaps of violet, and her lips pressed tight as she denied knowledge of any altercation. Finally, Victor Ray, the ambitious former pupil. Handsome, polished, his dark hair swept back, he exuded confident entitlement. Professor Green unleashed my potential, he declaimed with fervor. A man of genius should be generous to his disciples. Yet in private conversation, he had complained of Green's reluctance to publish Victor's findings, citing academic propriety over Ray's desire for acclaim. Poirot asked about Victor's whereabouts at 11 o'clock yesterday. Victor's brow wrinkled. I was in the gallery, studying his sketches, he said. Ask the assistant. But no assistant had been present, the gallery lay empty. Poirot listened to each account, his mind sorting truth from artifice. He allowed them to leave the hall one by one, and then proceeded with his own methodical observations. He examined the hearth's mantelpiece, where faint scorch marks suggested a recently moved candlestick. He inspected the oriental carpet, 2 distinct scuffs indicated a struggle of objects, not people. He noted that the morning papers lay bundled on a side table, untouched since delivery, though the matutinal postman had passed the gate at 8:30. Why had none of these individuals looked for news or announced the tragedy at once? In the library, Poirot found the professor's sketches laid open across a great oak desk. Botanical drawings of extraordinary precision, yet one sketch, of a delicate wild orchid, Van der Coerulia, was crossed out violently, the lines gouged as though in anger. Nearby sat a sealed envelope addressed to Lady Winifred, inscribed in Green's hand, "Read at once, urgent." The envelope remained unopened. Poirot lifted it carefully. The weight hinted at folded papers, perhaps the professor's last words. He pocketed it for later. Returning to the hall, Poirot called the assembled group back. Each took their place, eyes on him as though upon a stage. He cleared his throat. Miss Amis, our task is to reconstruct the events of yesterday, and the motives that guided them. The invisible hand of passion, ambition, fear, or loyalty may have directed the knife. He paused, letting the gravity settle. I shall require your full candor, and the relinquishment of any alibi unsupported by witness. Lady Marchmont inhaled sharply. Monsieur, what do you suspect? Poirot smiled slightly. Not suspicion, madam, but inquiry. We shall proceed step by step. First, the timeline of departures and arrivals. Second, your interactions with Professor Green. Third, any correspondence or disputes, no matter how trivial they may seem. He tapped his little grey cells. Only by unpicking each thread can we find the one that led to murder. As they dispersed to gather the information requested, Poirot lingered by the silver-framed portrait of Professor Green, his genial smile forever captured. Underneath, a small brass plaque bore the botanist's name and the dates, 1880 to 1925. Poirot's gaze was thoughtful. Monsieur, you walked amid wonders of nature, yet you fell victim to the most human of betrayals. He turned back toward the hearth, where the candlestick still bore its faint scorch. In that tiny imperfection, he saw the flicker of a clue. His little grey cells, meticulous and unerring, were already at work. Tomorrow, he would begin the interviews, and the truth would edge closer. Chapter 4, A Red Herring Emerges. A chill wind rattled the glass panes of the Marchmont greenhouse as afternoon drew on, and Poirot stood surveying the scene with calm precision. He had summoned all present to the library, ostensibly to review the schedule of house staff, but in truth to set a cunning trap. Each suspect, Lady Winifred, Dr. Bishop, Mr. Price, Miss Clarissa, and Victor Ray, sat before him on the leather-bound settees, their expressions taut with curiosity and unease. Miss Amis, Poirot began, his fingers lightly steepling before him. Before we proceed to further questioning, I must draw your attention to a discovery we made in the library this morning. He tapped a neat pile of papers on the central table. Professor Green's personal diary, torn, strangely, as if to conceal certain entries. He flipped back a few pages, revealing a half-ripped leaf. "This," he said, lifting the fragment, "was found crumpled on the floor beneath the professor's favorite reading lamp." All eyes turned to the torn page, where neat botanical sketches gave way to a hastily scrawled note. October 12, 1925. Argument with. I must warn her. The hybrid belongs to me. The rest of the line was missing, the paper raggedly torn at the edge. Beneath the date, a blot of purplish-brown ink smudged the corner, as though the writer had drawn their sleeve across it in haste. Lady Marchmont gasped. "It can't be," she exclaimed. "My Clarissa," she would never raise her voice in anger. Clarissa shook her head, face pale. "I was at supper with Aunt Winifred until 9 o'clock. I did not even see him that evening." Poirot inclined his head thoughtfully. "Nevertheless, the diary suggests that Professor Green argued with someone over an orchid. 'The hybrid belongs to me,'" he quoted. This could refer to a dispute over intellectual property, or perhaps something more personal. He let silence hang for a moment. "And this," he added, pointing to the ink blot, "is peculiar. It is not merely ink, but a mixture of ink and an oily residue." Dr. Bishop, leaning forward, peered at the blot. "That looks like the sap of Nepenthes raja, the carnivorous pitcher plant. I have handled it many times for my research." Her voice wavered. "But why would it smear on his diary?" "An excellent question, Dr. Bishop," Poirot replied smoothly. "We have already noted traces of pollen and plant fluid at the crime scene, in the greenhouse, yes." He tapped his temple. "My little grey cells tell me someone has deliberately planted this diary fragment to mislead us. The presence of Nepenthes sap here points suspicion towards you, Dr. Bishop, yet the professor's journal would not naturally come into contact with that plant." Dr. Bishop's lip quivered. "Monsieur, I assure you I never touched his diary." Poirot nodded. "Of that, we shall have proof. But first, let us examine the fragment's origin. I have sent for the custodian of the estate's archives to compare the torn page with the original bound volume. Meanwhile, I propose we review each person's access to the library and the greenhouse on the evening of October 12th. He turned to Mr. Price. "Mr. Price, you oversee the household. Did any guests or staff enter the library after 9 o'clock? Price's face was impassive. "Only the housekeeper, Madame Hatherley, came in to collect the evening china. She would not linger. No other entries were logged until breakfast." Poirot raised an eyebrow. "Thank you. Lady Marchmont, you mentioned you and Miss Clarissa dined until 9. Victor Ray, where were you?" Victor sat forward, his neck tensing. "I was in my rooms, reviewing botanical sketches for my article. I did not go anywhere near the library." Poirot's gaze flicked to the open doorway. "And Miss Marchmont, you say you were with your aunt. Yet a torn leaf ended up beneath the library lamp. Who, then, could have torn it?" Clarissa's hand flew to her throat. I have no idea. I never entered the library that evening." A hush fell, broken only by the grandfather clock ticking behind Poirot. He lifted his hands, palms out. "Let us not leap to conclusions. Instead, consider the blot. It is composed of ink mixed with plant sap. If one wished to cast suspicion on Dr. Bishop, one might smudge her research fluid onto the diary. Similarly, the torn note hints a quarrel with her, insinuating a female suspect, Miss Marchmont. Yet I ask you, who other than Dr. Bishop brings the tools for handling such specimens into the library?" He paused for effect. "Madame Hatherley does not concern herself with botany. Mr. Price, you maintain the thermostats and logs, but you need not handle plant sap. Lady Marchmont, well, you might admire the plants, but you are no botanist. Thus, the sap was likely transferred by someone posing as Dr. Bishop, or by Dr. Bishop herself planting false clues. Dr. Bishop's brows lifted. You think I framed myself? Poirot's eyes twinkled. Not quite. I believe someone framed you. He crossed to the window and drew aside the heavy curtains. Outside, the grounds lay bathed in the silver of a rising moon, the dew gleaming on the lawns. He returned to the table and picked up the fragment. Examine the tear. With a gentle gesture, he held the edge between thumb and forefinger. Notice how the fibers separate cleanly. This was done with a sharp blade, not torn by hand. Someone used a knife to precise effect. Victor Ray frowned. But why would they go to such trouble? Why not plant the diary leaf in the greenhouse? Poirot nodded. Because they wished us to find it here, in the library, and draw our conclusions accordingly. A red herring of great subtlety. He tapped the fragment. Now, the question, who had access to that particular knife? The very one used to tear the paper. He paused, allowing the implication to settle. I believe our culprit has a key to the professor's study, which contains an array of desk implements. Lady Marchmont gasped. Only Clarissa and I have such keys. Clarissa's face went ashen. Aunt, that is ridiculous. I gave mine to Professor Green to show him my sketches. Poirot held up a hand. Exactly my point. Miss Marchmont had admission, as did Lady Marchmont. Yet only one of you could stage this forgery without detection. And only one of you has motive sufficient to anger the professor by claiming his hybrid as your own. He placed the fragment on the table with great care. But the deeper we look, the more contradictions appear. For example, the ink itself, I have examined it under magnification, and it is not the same composition as the professor's journal ink. Someone has used a different inkstand, most likely the blue-black ink reserved for household correspondence, not botanical notes. A further clue, the blot's hue is slightly more violet than the typical Kew Gardens ink that Dr. Bishop uses. In short, this is no accident of study, it is an act of calculated deception. Dr. Bishop exhaled slowly. Monsieur, you believe I was set up? Poirot inclined his head. Oh madam. But the trail leads elsewhere. I suspect our mystifier is among those with both motive and the wherewithal to fake handwriting, access the inkstand, and know of the professor's passion for orchids. He turned to Victor. Mr. Ray, you have expressed frustration that your own hybrid work went unpublished. Could you have hoped to discredit the professor by suggesting he was protective of discoveries, even to the point of lethal quarrel? Victor bristled. You insult me, monsieur. I admired him, he was my mentor. Yet ambition, mon ami, can twist admiration into something darker. Poirot's gaze was gentle but firm. And Miss Marchmont, your desire to see your aunt's estate flourish might be threatened by exposure of your horticultural ventures. You, too, have motive. Miss Marchmont shrank, but her voice remained steady. If you suspect me, I invite you to produce proof. Poirot smiled. Patience. The proof is in the details. The tear's clean edge suggests a single, precise stroke. Only one person here wields a knife with such precision, the professor's own carving knife, which Lady Marchmont holds in her china cabinet for letter opening. Mother dear, he said, turning to Lady Winifred, whom do you trust with that knife? Lady Marchmont's lips pressed together. I trust only my niece. Victor Ray's jaw clenched. Clarissa stood to inherit. Enough. Clarissa's voice cracked. I did not, she broke off. Poirot held up a hand. I understand, mademoiselle. But let us return to the greenhouse tonight. I propose we witness how these plants behave, and see if the culprit returns to tend the red herrings. Turning to the assembled party, Poirot drew his coat about him. The garden shall be our stage again at dusk. I ask each of you to accompany me, no one is to stray. There, we shall observe who shows undue interest in the nepenthes and who is quick to divert attention from painted tricks. He glanced at the torn diary leaf once more. And perhaps in that company, the true hand that planted this false trail will reveal itself. Thus Poirot ended the afternoon's examination, leaving his audience unsettled and intrigued in equal measure. As they filed from the library, each person carried the weight of suspicion, for the detective's words had sown seeds of doubt that would grow in the coming hours. And Poirot, slipping the torn page into a protective envelope, smiled inwardly. The red herring had been cast, and now the chase would truly begin. Chapter 5, Secrets in the Bowels of the Estate. An ochre-tinged dusk settled over Marchmont estate as Hercule Poirot led the party across dewy lawns toward the potting sheds and storehouses beyond the walled vegetable garden. The air was crisp with the scent of damp earth and fallen leaves. Miss Amos, Poirot announced, we venture now to the outbuildings where the estate's true labors are carried out. Here, secrets may lie buried beneath wood and tin. Lady Winifred Marchmont followed close behind, her lace shawl drawn about her shoulders. Dr. Eleanor Bishop walked with measured steps, her gaze flicking nervously from the crates to the overhanging eaves. Victor Ray strode beside Miss Clarissa Marchmont, both wore anxious expressions. Mr. Thomas Price brought up the rear, lantern in hand, its faint glow dancing across brickwork and stacked pots. They entered the first shed, a low, broad structure with peeling green paint, past rows of wicker baskets, sacks of peat, and coils of rope. Poirot paused beneath a hanging oil lamp. I wish to examine every corner, he said. His little grey cells were already at work. Let us begin by inspecting the soil and storage. Lady Marchmont unlatched a wooden crate and lifted its lid. Inside lay a selection of labelled seed packets and gardening tools. Poirot peered in, his sharp eyes catching a flash of colour beneath a burlap sack nearby. He knelt and drew aside the sack to reveal a smaller wooden box sealed with a customs label. The label bore the address of a firm in Antwerp and was marked, Botanical Specimens, Confidential. He tapped the crate's side. Madam, did you order this shipment? Lady Marchmont shook her head. Not to my knowledge. We have no regular shipments to Belgium. She glanced uneasily at Dr. Bishop. Poirot's gaze shifted to the botanist. Dr. Bishop, you are the estate's consulting botanist. Might you have arranged for international exchange of specimens? Dr. Bishop's lips parted, then pressed into a straight line. I confess I arranged one shipment under permit from the Royal Botanical Society. But the plants here appear considerably more exotic than anything I authorized. He prized open the crate, revealing inside several orchids and nepenthes specimens, their roots wrapped in moss. Some bore delicate tags reading Nepenthes attenboroughi and Bulbophyllum medusae, species not known to be cultivated anywhere in England. Poirot withdrew his handkerchief and, with gloved fingers, gathered a faint violet-tinted residue from the crate's rim. He held it to the lantern's light. This stain matches the violet hue we found on the diary fragment. A clue to our forger. Victor Ray frowned. But you said only Dr. Bishop handles plant fluids. Poirot smiled serenely. Indeed, but the fluids could have been applied here. The presence of these smuggled specimens indicates someone was willing to break the law for profit or prestige. He turned to Mr. Price. "And you, steward, did you observe any unusual comings or goings here?" Price cleared his throat. "Last week, I noticed a late-night delivery. A covered wagon drew up at the west gate. I saw no permit, and I was out of sight before the crates were brought in. That is the night of the torn diary entry, October 12th, Poirot mused. A coincidence? Or part of a larger scheme?" He closed the crate gently. "Let us inspect the potting shed adjacent." They entered a second building, where long benches held rows of seedlings under glass frames. Terracotta pots lay at their bases, tool racks lined the walls. Gloucestershire ivy crawled in through a broken pane. Poirot approached a bench where a watering can lay overturned. He knelt and examined its spout, a trace of violet-tinged residue. More of the ink-sap mixture, he noted. Someone extinguished their watering there after smudging the diary page. Dr. Bishop's face grew pale. "Monsieur, I swear I have no knowledge of this." Poirot nodded. "Ah, but look." He lifted a tray of seedling trays and pointed beneath, footprints pressed into the damp earth floor. Two sets, one large, one small. The large matched the greenhouse print, the small, a dainty pattern, perhaps a woman's size 6 boot. Clarissa started, glancing down at her shoes. Lady Marchmont gasped. Miss Clarissa Marchmont swallowed hard. I only visit the greenhouse by permission." "Permission granted, yes," Poirot conceded. "Yet here we find evidence of someone who wished to avoid detection. She removed her boots either before entering or after exiting. The small prints accompany the large, indicating two people passed this way." He rose and surveyed the benches. "Now, notice this shelf." He pointed to a high plank where several glass jars stood, some filled with colored liquids. "Which of you recognizes this solution?" Dr. Bishop stepped forward, hesitating. That is a basic nutrient solution I use for tissue culture. I test samples here occasionally, away from the main greenhouse." Her voice wavered. "But I do not take it off-site." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Yet someone has." The crate to Antwerp likely contained living specimens requiring care during transit. A clever smuggler would use such a solution to preserve them. He turned to Victor Ray. "Mr. Ray, your ambition knows few bounds. Would you risk illicit trade in rare orchids to secure your academic reputation?" Victor's eyes narrowed. "You have no proof." "True," Poirot admitted. "But observations pile upon observations. Mr. Price, do you recall if the wagon delivered crates like these or different ones?" Price thought a moment. "They were smaller, sealed, and not marked with the estate's insignia. The driver wore a dark coat and thick gloves, even though the evening was warm." "Dark coat, thick gloves," Poirot repeated. "A disguise. An individual wishing to remain unknown." He paused, letting the crackling oil lamp provide a moment's silence. Then he spoke softly, "Dr. Bishop, who else on the estate has the knowledge to cultivate these exotic plants?" "Who assists you?" "You have an assistant, do you not?" Dr. Bishop's lips quivered. "Lila Thornton, a young gardener I hired for her enthusiasm." "And Miss Thornton's whereabouts?" Poirot inquired. Dr. Bishop hesitated. She has been on sick leave. Fell ill after a picnic by the river." Poirot raised an eyebrow. "Perhaps. Or perhaps she was the intermediary between our smuggler and the outside world." He turned to Miss Clarissa. "Mademoiselle, you kept company with Miss Thornton at times, sharing horticultural secrets, did you not?" Clarissa's face went red. "She was a friend. But she had no part in this. Perhaps not, Poirot conceded. Nevertheless, the trail leads through these outbuildings, and through Dr. Bishop's field notes, which Dr. Bishop claims she alone maintains. Yet the violet stains suggest our forger and smuggler worked in tandem to confuse us. He faced them all. Tonight we uncovered clandestine shipments, secret plant fluids, and dual footprints. We revealed that someone here sought to transport endangered orchids illegally, and likely used the same hand to plant evidence at the murder scene. The question now is, who had motive both to kill Professor Green and to profit from his botanical knowledge? Lady Marchmont swallowed. Who among us is so bold? Poirot's moustache quivered in a discreet smile. Our answer draws near. Tomorrow, we shall examine the shipping records at the local post office and the customs house in town. By then, I shall have identified the forger, the smuggler, and the murderer. As they left the potting sheds, a tense hush followed them across the grounds. Poirot paused at the door, lantern held aloft. His gaze swept the darkening estate. Mon Dieu, he murmured, how fragile is the barrier between scientific endeavor and greed, and between admiration and envy. He slipped the torn diary fragment into his breast pocket and stepped into the night, confident that the hidden crate had unlocked a crucial piece of the puzzle. Behind him, the shed stood silent, guardians of botanical secrets now laid bare. And in those silent walls, the heart of the mystery continued to pulse, awaiting the final reveal at dawn's first light. Chapter 6, A Second Attempt. Late that evening, the household sat down to supper in the oak-paneled dining room, where the flicker of candles danced across silverware and dark mahogany. The tension from the day's discoveries lingered like a heavy perfume. Poirot, seated at the head of the table beside Lady Winifred, observed each guest with his ever-present calm curiosity. He noted the hall door, bolted against the night outside, the windows, shuttered, and the servants, lingering discreetly in the background, their eyes wide with unease. No sooner had the first courses been cleared than a footman entered bearing a sealed envelope addressed to Lady Winifred. The wax crest, Marchmont's family insignia, was broken. Lady Winifred's hand trembled as she broke the seal and pulled out the parchment. Her face went ashen. Monsieur Poirot, she whispered, it threatens another death. Poirot leaned forward, his moustache quivering with attention. He took the note gently and read aloud. Silence or blood spills again. Meet me in the greenhouse at midnight, alone. No one else. A hush fell. Victor Ray's fork clattered to his plate. Dr. Bishop set down her glass of water, eyes wide. Clarissa Marchmont's gloved hand flew to her throat, Mr. Price's jaw tensed. Poirot folded the note and placed it in an envelope. This, he said softly, is no idle threat. It is designed to draw one of you into peril as a diversion. He looked around the table. We must not allow panic to drive our actions. I propose that, though the hour is late, I accompany Lady Marchmont to the greenhouse. No one must leave this room until our safe return. Lady Winifred nodded, pale but resolute. The other guests exchanged anxious glances. Dr. Bishop rose. Monsieur, allow me to accompany you. No harm should come to Lady Marchmont. Poirot inclined his head. Your concern is appreciated, madam, but I prefer to witness this event alone. It is too dangerous for more. After brief hesitation, Dr. Bishop sat back down. Poirot dismissed the servants and bade everyone remain seated. If you hear anything, any cry, send Mr. Price immediately. Do not investigate yourselves. By 11:30, Poirot and Lady Marchmont had slipped away. They crossed the dew-slicked lawns to the greenhouse under a sky so dark it seemed to swallow even moonlight. Poirot carried a small lantern, its beam revealing the glistening outlines of ferns and orchids. I suspect our culprit will use this summons to divert suspicion from the true murderer, he said, voice low. Observe the floor closely. Lady Marchmont tensed as they entered. Poirot stepped aside to reveal a pair of footprints in the moist soil, one large, one small, fresh and untainted by dew. 2 sets, Poirot whispered. One to escort, one to ambush. He moved deeper among the benches to a raised central path. Here, he pointed to a slight muddle in the gravel bordering the flagstones. These indicate someone alighted from the perimeter path, then slipped their boots before entering the soil. The small print belongs to Lady Marchmont's shoes, the large to our murderer. Notice anything? Lady Marchmont looked and then gasped softly. It seems, my shoes, monsieur. I did not remove them. Poirot nodded. Precisely. The summons was not meant for you, Lady Marchmont, it was meant for another, someone who could be lured here in your stead. The forger assumed you would slip off your shoes, but you did not. Instead, your boots remained on the terrace. Hence, those small prints were planted by the murderer, to make us think you were present. He paused by a pot of Nepenthes Raja, its pictures reflecting the lantern's light like silent sentries. And the large prints? They matched those from the potting sheds, likely intended to draw suspicion to our smuggler as well. Lady Winifred shivered. What now, monsieur? Poirot's eyes gleamed. Now, we wait, for the true intended victim to enter. They crouched near the long bench. For several tense minutes, nothing stirred but the soft drip of condensation. Then, a slender figure emerged from shadow, Miss Clarissa Marchmont, boots on, gloved hands clasping the lantern offered by Mr. Price, who lingered at the greenhouse door. Clarissa's voice trembled. Aunt received a note, and I feared it might be for me. I came to warn her. Poirot stepped forward. Mademoiselle, you walk into a clever trap. Clarissa frowned. I do not understand. Poirot mapped his finger along the prints. Someone planted these small prints here, he said gently. Your aunt did not come, they hoped you would, so that your death could be attributed to the same culprit who struck the professor. Clarissa sank to a bench, tears in her eyes. Why would someone wish me harm? Poirot extinguished his lantern and switched on the electric lights above, recently installed, though seldom used. The sudden glare revealed a second figure tiptoeing along the central path, a man, tall, cloaked in dark overcoat. Victor Ray. His face blurred by haste, he paused as the lights snapped on. In that instant, Poirot seized a slender glass vial from the bench beside the Nepenthes and held it aloft. Monsieur Ray, he cried. Ray froze, eyes wide. Poirot, this is folly, he stammered. Poirot advanced. How convenient that you should return to the greenhouse, sir, under cover of darkness. And how convenient that you did not remove your boots, your muddy boots that match these prints, as though you expected none to notice. He held the vial to the light, it contained a faint yellow liquid. This, I believe, is the same poison attempted on Dr. Bishop's orchid specimens, and also the substance found upon the torn diary leaf. Ray's face drained of blood. You cannot prove, he began. Poirot lifted a slender finger. Ah, but I already have proof. He motioned to Mr. Price, who approached and retrieved a fallen glove near the glasshouse door. Inside was a folded note in Ray's handwriting, a draft of the midnight summons, addressed not to Lady Marchmont, but to Clarissa. This fell from your pocket as you crept in, said Poirot. You intended to murder her here by poison, and then claimed the continued red herring of silent threats. Once Miss Marchmont was gone, suspicion would fall back upon Dr. Bishop and Lady Marchmont. All the while, you would continue your smuggling operation unimpeded. Victor Ray sank to his knees. Alistair refused to name me co-discoverer of his new hybrid. He said I must earn it, he moaned. I could not permit that. I loved him like a master, yet my pride was wounded. I tried to weaken him with poison, then finish the deed with a knife, but he died too soon. I planted the diary fragment to suggest Dr. Bishop's appendage of sap. When that failed, I sought to kill Clarissa to mask the motive. Poirot nodded gravely. Ambition, in the wrong heart, can be most dangerous. He signalled to Mr. Price. Fetch Dr. Bishop and Lady Marchmont. Within moments, the two women appeared, drawn by Ray's cry. They watched in horror as Ray, pale and trembling, was bound by the steward's steady hands. Lady Winifred placed a hand on Clarissa's shoulder. My dear, you unharmed. Clarissa brushed a tear from her cheek. Yes, aunt. Monsieur Poirot saved me. Poirot offered a slight bow. The game was nearly lost, but the little grey cells prevailed. As the household grouped beneath the ironwork of the glass house, Poirot took one last look at the pictures, the bench, the footprints preserved in the moist soil. Let this night stand as testament, he said softly, that cunning and malice may hide behind the guise of devotion, but truth, inevitably, will shine through. The moon emerged from behind a cloud, casting gentle light upon the scene. Here, within the walls of glass and green, another chapter had closed, and the final revelations awaited them at dawn. Chapter 7, The Little Grey Cells in Motion. Dawn broke over Marchmont estate in a pale wash of silver and rose. The dew still clung to the lawn's blades, and the world exhaled a gentle, misty breath. Inside the drawing-room, the household gathered once more, Lady Winifred Marchmont seated with Clarissa at her side, Dr. Eleanor Bishop standing near the window, Mr. Thomas Price by the door, and Victor Ray, bruised and contrite, confined to an armchair. Hercule Poirot, ever impeccable, waited before the hearth, fingers lightly steepled, moustache waxed to perfection. Miss Amis, Poirot began, voice calm yet resonant, we have walked through deceit and danger these past days, but still some questions remain unanswered. He paused, letting the gravity of his words settle upon them. Before we confront the final truth, we must retrace our steps with care. He retrieved from his coat an envelope bearing the postmark of Antwerp. Last night, I dispatched an inquiry to the customs house requesting details of the shipment's recipient. The reply arrived this morning. He extracted a sheet of paper and read aloud. Consignee, Miss Clarissa Marchmont, Marchmont Estate, Kent. Clarissa paled. That can't be. I never. Lady Winifred reached for her daughter's hand. It was registered in your name, she whispered. Poirot nodded. Indeed. Yet you denied knowledge of this crate. Clarity flickered in his eyes. Who, then, would consign rare orchids to your name, if not you? Clarissa's lips trembled. I don't know. Patience, said Poirot. We shall see. He placed the customs note upon the coffee table and turned to Dr. Bishop. Madam, you claimed only one shipment was authorized by the Royal Botanical Society, and that to you. Yet these illicit specimens did not pass through your hands. Dr. Bishop's quivering voice answered, Monsieur, I was misled as much as you. A clerk at the Society's office filled my permit forms with mistaken species names. Poirot nodded thoughtfully. An error of convenience. He crossed back to the hearth. Now, let us revisit the timeline of Monday evening, October 12th. At 8:30, Lady Marchmont and Clarissa retired from the drawing-room. At 9, Victor Ray claims he went to the gallery, alone. At 10, Dr. Bishop tended to her tissue cultures in the secondary greenhouse. At 11, Mr. Price logged the nightly rounds. And by midnight, 2 attempted murders occurred, the professor's poisoning and Clarissa's summons to the greenhouse. He raised a finger. Yet the notebook entry, argument with, "The hybrid belongs to me," was torn not in the professor's hand, but after his death. Only then could someone safely plant that note. Lady Marchmont's brow furrowed. So the diary fragment was a false clue. Exactly. Poirot's gaze swept the room. And the violet-stained residue upon it matches the nutrient solution container in the potting shed. Thus, our forger returned there after the murder, then in the library, to smear the sap, and drew attention to Dr. Bishop. Dr. Bishop sighed. "But who?" she asked softly. Poirot tapped the hearth. "Look at the evidence from the potting shed again, 2 sets of footprints, one small, one large, together entering and leaving. Yet at the scene of the greenhouse murder, only the large prints remained. The small were planted, as we discovered when Lady Marchmont did not remove her boots. That small print belonged not to her, but to another woman of slight build." All eyes turned to Clarissa. She drew in a trembling breath. "Monsieur, you cannot suspect me." He held up his hand. "Not yet. But your penchant for disguise, the drawn curtains in your room, your tendency to wander at odd hours, suggest you know these grounds intimately. Yet note this, the crate addressed to you was delivered on October 13th, after the professor's death. Only one person had motive to frame you for smuggling, Victor Ray, to divert suspicion from himself." Victor Ray's head snapped up. "Frame her? Why?" Poirot's moustache quivered. "Because you needed a scapegoat. If the police suspected Miss Marchmont, you could continue your illicit trade unmolested. And your own wounds, those powder burns on your jacket cuff, you claimed from the primer lamp in the study, but they matched the residue of the poison formula. You used the lamp to cook the toxin for the diary smear, and scorched your sleeve in doing so." Victor stammered, "That's impossible." Poirot pressed on. "And what of the knife?" "The same pruning knife used on Professor Green lay in your possession. You told me you had borrowed it to prune your laboratory specimens in the greenhouse. Yet you returned it unwashed, its blade smeared with blood and pollen." He held up the knife, its handle gleaming. "I retrieved it before you could hide it." Victor Ray slumped. I thought I could control it. I never meant to kill Clarissa." Poirot nodded. "Perhaps. But intent is rendered moot by result. Now, there is one final puzzle, the sealed envelope addressed to Lady Marchmont found among the professor's sketches. You claim to know nothing of it, Lady Marchmont. Yet the envelope held his final letter, written minutes before death, stating, 'Winifred, forgive me, I discovered the betrayal tonight. All is lost.'" He turned to Lady Marchmont, whose eyes brimmed. "The professor believed you had discovered his knowledge of illegal shipments and would expose him, or so Mr. Ray would have you believe." Lady Marchmont's voice trembled. "He thought I would turn him in. But I loved him, he was my dearest friend." Poirot's expression softened. His fear was misplaced. He need not have worried. But Mr. Ray counted on that fear to ensure everyone turned away from him. He stepped between them. Thus, we have, the poisoning attempt, concealed by contrived botanical smears, the staged diary fragment, planted in the library, the forged summons intended to kill Clarissa, and the crate addressed to her, each piece a calculated diversion. Behind it all stood one man, Victor Ray. Victor Ray bowed his head. "I confess. I killed him." As wails of anguish rose from Lady Marchmont and Clarissa, Dr. Bishop placed a gentle hand on Victor's shoulder. "You shall answer for this." Poirot nodded. "Yes. But let justice be tempered with understanding. Ambition can drive the noblest soul to ruin." He turned to the assembled party. "I thank you for your patience and candor. The little grey cells have triumphed, and order is restored." Outside, the sun emerged from behind a bank of clouds, casting warm rays through the mullioned windows. The hearth's reflection danced upon the polished floors. In that light, Poirot allowed himself a small smile. He stepped back and, with characteristic grace, raised a hand in farewell. "Now, Miss Amis, our task is done. May Marchmont estate find peace once more." And with that, Hercule Poirot, ever elegant, departed the drawing-room, leaving behind a household forever changed, its secrets laid bare, and a mystery resolved by the precision of his little grey cells. Chapter 8, Revelation and Resolution. The first light of dawn filtered through the tall mullioned windows of Marchmont's drawing-room, casting long, golden shafts across the polished oak floor. Outside, the dew glistened upon the manicured lawns, and the world stirred gently to life. Inside, however, quiet tension remained. Lady Winifred Marchmont sat poised on the velvet settee, her composure restored yet still tinged with sorrow. Beside her, Clarissa's pale face gleamed with a mixture of relief and fatigue. Dr. Eleanor Bishop, exonerated at last, tended with gentle care to a newly rescued orchid just inside its pot. Mr. Thomas Price stood at the door, ready to receive the constabulary, and in the armchair by the hearth sat Victor Ray, head bowed in remorseful silence. Hercule Poirot, the very picture of elegance in his morning coat, surveyed the assembly with a kindly yet incisive gaze. His little grey cells thrummed with satisfaction and solemnity alike. Clearing his throat softly, he rose and stepped forward, hands clasped before him. "Miss Amis," he began, voice calm and resonant, "we stand at the close of a most tragic affair. It is my duty now to set forth the full truth of what transpired, and to demonstrate how each strand of evidence we uncovered has been woven together to reveal the culprit and the motive behind these dark deeds." He walked to the center of the room and laid upon the low table the final piece of evidence, a sealed letter in Professor Green's handwriting, now carefully unsealed by Lady Marchmont. Poirot motioned for her to read its contents aloud. With trembling hands, Lady Marchmont unfolded the parchment and disclosed the professor's last words. "Winifred, I have discovered evidence of illicit orchid shipments from the estate, shipments not authorized by the Royal Botanical Society. I fear one I trusted has betrayed both science and friendship. I shall confront them tonight, for the sake of truth. Forgive me my haste. Alistair." A hush fell. Lady Marchmont's voice wavered as she replaced the note. "He meant to protect us, from scandal and from the law," she whispered. Poirot nodded. "Indeed. Professor Green's intent was pure. He wished only to expose smuggling and preserve the integrity of botanical science. Tragically, his own initiative brought about his demise." He paused, allowing that somber thought to settle before continuing. "Let us recall the sequence of events on the night of October 12th. At 8:30, you, Lady Marchmont and Miss Clarissa, withdrew to the drawing-room after dinner. At 9 o'clock, Victor Ray retired to the gallery to review the professor's sketches. At 10, Dr. Bishop tended to her tissue cultures in the secondary greenhouse. By 11, Mr. Price made his customary rounds of the estate. And sometime between 11 and midnight, Professor Green was lured into the glasshouse under pretense of discussing the new hybrid. There, he was poisoned with a subtle tincture, and then fatally stabbed. The stages of the crime were masked by misdirection, ink smudges of Nepenthes sap to implicate Dr. Bishop, a torn diary fragment to sow doubt, mud-tracked footprints to mislead investigators, and, later, a forged summons to draw Miss Clarissa into the same deadly trap. He returned to the hearth and held aloft a small vial. "This, Miss Amis, is the poison that rendered the professor weak, prussic ester disguised by botanical oils. Dr. Bishop discovered traces of it in her nutrient solution, leading me to deduce the attempt upon these orchids was but a prelude to murder. And the vial itself was concealed among the Nepenthes in the potting sheds, where our smuggler could access both plant fluid and poison without arousing immediate suspicion." Turning to Dr. Bishop, he continued, "Madam, you were innocent of this crime. Your involvement was no deeper than any of us, and it was precisely because you handled such specimens legitimately that your research materials were misappropriated to frame you. Your steadfast composure, even under suspicion, revealed your integrity." Dr. Bishop inclined her head. "Monsieur Poirot, your faith in me restored more than my reputation. I feel my trust in humanity rekindled. Let us now consider the torn diary fragment." Poirot laid the ragged edges side by side on the table. Professor Green's entry read, "Argument with. I must warn her. The hybrid belongs to me." This was an authentic late entry, but the tear and ink sap smudge were applied after death to implicate a quarrel with her, suggesting Miss Clarissa. Yet examination showed the ink did not match his botanical journal but household correspondence ink, colored further by violet-tinted sap from the potting shed solutions. A deft forgery intended to mislead. He turned his attention next to Mr. Price. "Your discovering of the body at dawn, and your account of hearing nothing but a soft creak, were beyond reproach. Your swift signaling to share the news preserved the scene until I arrived." Mr. Price inclined his head in acknowledgement. "I only did my duty, monsieur." Now, to Miss Clarissa Marchmont. Poirot's expression was gentle. "You were the unintended target of a second attempt, summoned to the greenhouse at midnight. Whoever wrote that note designed to have you follow, slip into the plants, and meet the same fate as the professor. That note bore your aunt's seal in an effort to misdirect us further. But Lady Winifred's boots remained outside, and the small footprints were planted away from your gloved and unmarked steps." Clarissa drew a calm breath. "I came to warn Aunt, not harm myself. And monsieur, your insight saved me from a trap not meant for me." Poirot smiled. "Indeed. Lastly, then, we arrive at the man whose ambition overrode every restraint, Mr. Victor Ray." He paused, eyes fixed on the seated figure. "You confess to orchestrating the smuggling of protected orchids abroad, using your status as a disciple of Professor Green to gain access and trust. When he uncovered your scheme, and, worse, discovered you had appropriated his hybrid, you feared exposure and disgrace. You sought to silence him first with poison, then with the blade." Victor's shoulders slumped. I thought I could control it. I loved him as a mentor, yet my pride, my desperation for recognition, turned that love into something monstrous." Poirot inclined his head. "Your crimes lie not only in the theft of nature's wonders, but in the taking of human life. The knife you borrowed for pruning bore his blood, the footprints you tracked through the soil have borne witness to your guilt. And the crate consigned to Miss Clarissa, bearing your spurious customs documents, served only to divert suspicion from you, that you might continue your illicit trade." He stood, removing his hat and placing it upon the table. "Victor Ray, you shall await the law's judgment. May you find in prison the time to contemplate the ruin wrought by hubris." As Mr. Price escorted Ray solemnly from the room, a deep sorrow settled among the survivors. Lady Marchmont pressed a hand to her heart, and Clarissa reached out to steady her aunt. Dr. Bishop moved to rearrange the rescued orchids in a nearby pot, her touch tender. Poirot surveyed the gathering once more. Thus, all remains resolved. The orchids, though tainted by crime, shall find safe haven at Kew Gardens under proper permit, and their study will honor, rather than exploit, the marvels of nature. Professor Green's legacy shall endure in the hybrids he nurtured and in the integrity with which he served botanical science. And this household, he gestured around the room, shall, I trust, find peace once more. A single shaft of sunlight now pierced the window's leaded panes, illuminating the hearth's brass fender. Lady Marchmont rose and approached Poirot, her eyes glistening. Monsieur Poirot, words cannot convey our gratitude. You have restored honor to my family and justice to my dear friend. Poirot bowed slightly. Madam, it is my greatest pleasure to serve the cause of truth. He rounded the settee and offered his hand to Clarissa. Adieu, mademoiselle. May you continue your botanical pursuits with the professor's blessing upon your endeavors. Clarissa pressed his hand to her cheek. Thank you, monsieur. I shall never forget your kindness or your brilliance. With that, Poirot straightened his coat, adjusted his cravat, and took his cane. A hush fell as the household watched him traverse the drawing room, each step measured, each movement assured. At the door, he paused and turned. Remember always, Miss Amis, that the barrier between curiosity and obsession is thin. Cherish knowledge, uphold integrity, and let the little grey cells guide you toward justice, rather than away from it. With a final nod, he stepped into the hall, leaving behind an estate cleansed of deceit, ready once more to bloom in harmony and grace.